We are live. This is the August 2015 edition of the Node.js modules team. With us right now, we have a number of different members from the team. For everyone who's on the call right now, if you could open up the doc that we have and fill out your name if you're attending, that would be great. We have a pretty packed agenda today, and we'll just get right to it. The first thing that we had was approving a PR, but we don't currently have enough people on the call. So without quorum, we can't move forward with this right now. I'll come back to this issue later if we end up having enough people. So we have two items here for update on progress. One was create terminology.markdown, and the other one was a developer survey. I believe that both of these are being run by Smotel, who I do not see on the meeting today. So let's punt on those also for right now. And if they join us before the end of the meeting, we can try to find time to get into them. So just jumping right into our discussion, we have 4 major topics to talk about today. Thinking about deadlines, managing a forked and agreed upon minimal kernel, ESM in JS files, as well as transparent or not interop. So we're going to start off by just spending 5 minutes talking about deadlines, and I'm just going to say a thing or two. Salah has just joined us. So after we finish talking about deadlines, he can give us the updates on those other 2 issues. I'm going to set a little context on this. I'm going to set the clock for 5 minutes and then, kind of open it to the floor for people to talk. So timer has started. Deadlines are something that we talked about before. And there was definitely sentiment within the group that we did not want to have deadlines simply to have deadlines, that anything that was not that was picking a deadline before like any sort of timing or consensus was not going to necessarily be particularly helpful for this group reaching consensus and making sure that we're shipping the best thing possible. And I think every single person within this group feels the weight of the decisions that we're trying to make. With that being said, we have been running these meetings for quite a while, and while we are getting closer to consensus and have, even reached consensus around things like starting a fork, we're starting to discuss what a minimal kernel could look like. We still do not have any sort of insight as to when we may have something that we could be releasing without a flag. And I have had members of the steering committee voice concern about our lack of ability to reach consensus and about, having timeframes of shipping this. Specifically, these are not just concerns that are coming from a technical level, but there are organizations that are being consulted with, and these organizations are expressing concern that they don't know what the best practices are, that they have large code bases that are using transpilation right now, that are introducing problems, and that they're looking for the Node project to ship something to give guidance as to what we should be doing. And so I just wanted to bring this issue up again and just kind of get any insight from people if they maybe feel a little bit differently about this, just to kind of express some of that ecosystem pain that's being felt. And, bringing up once again, I think that we should be having a goal of shipping something that's not behind a flag, perhaps before Node 12 goes into LTS, which gives us, about another 14 months or so. But the sooner we could do it, the better chance we have of having something that can be backported to 10, or something that may even be able to be partially, but not totally backported to 8. So kind of moving back to the group now, does anyone have any thoughts on this or specific feelings, about coming up with deadlines? And do we think that perhaps having, I think some of these topics we don't have consensus on. We could talk till we're blue in the face, but I think having an explicit deadline maybe a forcing function for us to make decisions, at least even decisions in our fork. So do people think that there are deadlines that we could be introducing that would be helpful? Jeff, you just put something in the comments about rather than deadlines, we really need discussion on how to speed up the process. Do you have more thoughts on that you can add to the discussion?
I don't have suggestions on that, but I mean, if you want a deadline, then the question obviously becomes, how do you meet it? And maybe we almost don't need deadlines if we can just work faster, then it'll kind of happen naturally. But yeah, others can make suggestions on this.
Mm-hmm. Salah?
Yeah, sorry, I was checking if I was muted or not. I think deadlines, you know, they can be those things that we're saying, like deadline to ship, or we can say checkpoints, or, you know, points where things become concrete. You know, we have a working prototype within a couple of months, or let's say, you know, we have the terminology document, for instance, done by a certain point. And that would mean that we're able to just say, okay, if something depends on this, then it's roughly going to be delayed until this happens. So just having kind of a structural flow of how the deadlines will you know, interdepend, I think is more important than the actual set dates.
Okay, thank you, Salah. Jan, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with the checkpoint, milestone, whatever you want to call it. So I also think that, well, for me personally, I don't think that the deadlines, the dates are the important things. It's more that any way of expressing progress would be good. Like if we know these are the decisions that we need to make, these are the choices we have to make. If we have just a list of that, a list of these are the decisions we need to make in order to have a prototype. This is, we have a prototype, and just that we can see that there is progress. Because so far, I don't think we have a good measure for what progress is.
Okay, I think that that's a really good point, and I think it actually goes really nicely into the next agenda item that we have on here. So perhaps we should dig into this one first, and we can come to the updates afterwards. But managing a forked and an agreed upon minimal kernel. For individuals who are not part of the meeting last week or 2 weeks ago, we had consensus in the meeting that we would be open to creating a fork of the node repo, and inside of that fork, creating a minimal kernel. So stripping away the parts of the ESM implementation that we currently have that make other use cases not possible. So kind of coming up with a consensus around what a minimal implementation looks like that is entirely inclusive of all potential future implementations, and then allowing us to essentially, you know, make pull requests and issues against that for collections of features that create an entire workflow. And that, you know, that could make some of the work that we're doing more direct. So there was an issue opened yesterday to discuss it. There were a couple different things that needed to be decided there. First would be like, should this be a branch on the node repo? Should this be a fork? Should this be something in the node modules repo? That was one hanging question. And the other hanging question was, what would a minimal implementation look like? What would be part of this kernel? What would not be part of this kernel? And so perhaps something that we could have as milestones could be some things around a milestone for the fork, a milestone for the minimal kernel, milestones for getting certain feature set collections put in. I'm just planning some ideas, and I'll just kind of put it to the room. Kind of like starting with the first bit. What do people think that we should be doing for hosting this? Does a fork make sense to people? Gus, you've got your hand up.
Am I unmuted?
You are good.
So I kind of just want to keep it as close as possible to other core development, just because there are so many things here that interleave. Like even for people who aren't members of the Node modules team, right, there are a lot of concerns that come up when developing other features for Node. So I want to make sure that whatever we do, we're able to keep these big branching issues well communicated.
So does that mean that you do not want to see it as a separate repo?
Ideally, no, but as long as we come up with a really good method of making sure that, like I said, just like we're communicating properly with outside of ourselves.
So one thing that I can speak to, and then we've got some hands up. The HTTP2 working group or team, when it was spun up, had worked in a separate fork for this. And I believe they just treated the master branch of that fork, or the base branch can be called whatever, as the equivalent as a new branch. And that was just to keep the noise off of the main tracker. And it was consistently rebased against master, like on a daily basis. So that's something that we definitely could explore, and we could, explore reaching consensus about things from that branch that should be upstreamed when they're ready. Jeffrey, you have your hand up.
I mean, I'm okay with that. I mean, kind of just the way just to throw this out there, just the way I would do it if it were me. I don't know how this, tell me how you guys would do it. But if this were like a project of mine, I would take the current implementation that's in core, that's in master, or whatever the main branch is, move that out into a branch of its own, and that may turn that into a pull request against master. And then the minimal core becomes just a new pull request against master. And then as we gradually grow the minimal core, people submit pull requests against the minimal core branch. Like kind of if this were like a project that I were running here in my company, that's how I would structure it.
Yeah, that's unfortunately going to be a non-starter. In my personal opinion, if we can reach consensus that that's what we're going to do. But I do not believe that removing anything from master right now is something that we can consider doing, especially how it's connected. A lot of the different parts are super interconnected. We also are shipping it already in 10 and 8. And even though it is flagged, it would be a huge disruption to the ecosystem to kind of pull that out from under them right now.
But then I just don't understand then, like, why are we building a new implementation if like the one that we're shipping is like so special that it can't be taken out, can't be revised upon? Like if that's so like it's out there in the public and we need to like honor it and backward compatibility and all these things, then we should be building against that, and we should be having a pull request against that as if we're going to be changing it rather than saying that like it's a new base.
We need to reach consensus as to what the major change is going to be before we do a major change. If we do it all in pull requests in core, every time we make a pull request, every time we make an issue, it's pinging thousands of people. I think part of this is about creating a low noise place where we can hash out these ideas and then bring it over to core when it's ready.
Okay, well, that's reasonable.
Salah, you have your hand up?
Yeah, ever since I saw module wrap, I wondered if it could be like a native module, or what I'm trying to say now is more so if we create a native module that is separate from the current implementation, and in that native module, we're able to, have the same hooks or the same level of performance that you get from the current implementation, the behind the flag implementation, then what we are designing can not only just work in the current version, but if people want it, they could also port it to other, like Electron, for instance, or something like that. And all of this can happen, giving us the flexibility to stay close to module wrap or as far away as we need to. I'm more inclined to be close to module wrap than far away, but that separate, native module approach really means that we are not depending or changing the main branch too much to reach our goal, whatever that will be, because we don't know exactly the goal.
Okay, thank you, Salah. Jay Dalton?
Hi, okay. I think a repo within the org is fine. It's a place to file separate issues. We can create multiple branches within it, and we can scope discussion to that without having to ping others. For me, it seems like a nice place to keep it in its own area. That's what we did with Worker. We're doing it with REPL. We've done it with a couple of other things. I'm pro repo and org. Cool.
Awesome, thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, I also think the fork idea sounds fine. We just need to identify, whoever is going to, or if it's multiple people, whoever is going to, be in charge of rebasing and pulling in whatever comes into the to the node upstream. So.
Excellent, thank you. Jan?
Yeah, so what I wanted to say is just to the idea of turning it into a library, so something that you can just install with Node. There's a huge advantage to that, which is people can actually try it out. If we do a fork, we basically cannot tell anybody out there in this group to try it out, other than us regularly building nightly versions for all kinds of platforms, which is not really practical. So there's definitely a huge advantage in making it a library that people can install from NPM. The big problem with that is that works for the basic module system. It becomes tricky for dynamic import, and it becomes impossible for import meta because of how the V8 APIs works right now. So it would require changes in V8, or to at least the public V8 API to make that possible.
So, Jan, just a clarifying question really quickly. How do you think that we could improve that?
You mean in V8 or from our side?
Yeah, or just like the discoverability problem that you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, so if we go with a fork, it means that people who are not willing to do a build from source of Node itself manually on their machine cannot really try it out. So unless we find a way to set up nightly builds for different platforms, it would be very hard to try it out. And even if we have nightly builds, with the current situation of Node version managers, it would still be kind of painful to just try it out.
So the build team could easily make builds out of the fork and make those easily available now.
Yeah, but that gets us on the level of nightly builds, which is something that's possible, but also something that's somewhat painful if you wanted to install it. Like, there's a reason why few people try out nightly builds, at least casual Node users, because you cannot just NVM install X. You actually need to know a little bit.
A flag.
Yeah. Not by default, at least. Not without some additional work. Yeah. So I think getting nightly builds would at least address some of the pain. If we would want to make it work as a native module, we would have to have a way to, after creation of the isolate, change the callbacks for dynamic import, which I think already is possible, but also for import meta, and that is the thing that is not right now exposed.
Okay, great. Thank you. Gus?
So for the external module, there are a lot of things that we have to do that cannot be explicitly provided without hooking, like calling from node core into the implementation, like context lifetime tracking and a bunch of other random things that we would have to, like, I guess, like either stub into core to call into the module we would ship, or I don't even know what. So like it would be really cool to do. I just don't think it's like something at this moment like worth pursuing just because of the complexity around it.
Thank you. And Salah, and then I'm just going to make a note that we only have about 10 minutes left on this topic. So after this one bit, I think we could shift to what does the kernel look like? So Salah, to you.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of view the technical challenge that Gus pointed out as a good opportunity, and the fact that there might be upstream housekeeping, really. Those are good opportunities to actually, because when you write isolated modules, you tend to uncover, tightly coupled causes for concern that could actually just be hidden under the fact that it's all in one repo. But with a native module, although there will be a technical challenge to actually set up, the first implementation of that native module, I think it's actually high time to actually, clean up things that might have happened over several implementations or partial implementations. I'm sure, the working implementation and everything involved in it is perfect. But there are certain things that might be closed for no good reason or might have existed and not gotten removed. So I'm really hoping that other people buy into the native module for its benefits, or point out weaknesses as well, aside from the technical challenge, of course, because that's the given, right?
Okay, thank you very much. We can kick off an issue specifically about talking about that. And I think one thing we can definitely do once we make the fork, which it sounds like we have the most support for right now, is we can open an issue or a pull request that examines that approach. So the other thing that we talked about that was part of this topic was the idea of a minimal kernel. Specifically, what is the minimal kernel that we would want to have in this fork that we would be making pull requests against. There is currently inside of the issue 2 different proposals for what a minimal kernel could be. The first was from Gil. The idea of minimum is to 1, have all ESM functionality included, 2, to avoid debate on all thorny issues, being kind of the guiding principles for this. So it includes the ability to import an ESM either with import from in an ESM file or dynamic import. Avoiding the file extension debate, import will not guess the file extension and will import a file as ESM. If things are being imported as a folder, it will look for a package.json main property and will load that as ESM. Again, will not guess the file extension. Will not look for index.js because that will provoke a file extension debate, and we all want to avoid that. The regular CJS folder searching algorithm will be used. This is like node modules and all that, except that it will not look for index.js or index.mjs. And avoiding the transparent interop debate, CJS will be able to dynamically import ESM. ESM will not be able to require CJS. Gil, quickly, before I move on to the next proposed kernel, was there anything about that that I miscategorized or missed?
No, it was a lengthy talk about, basically it's your option, but with the regular node module resolution. I think that's the main question that we discussed in the issue.
Yeah. So then the one that I proposed was no transport interop. Import only supports ESM, so no JSON, no common, no native modules. Perhaps an explicit ban on importing .js files specifically right now, so there isn't expected behavior for that. No extension or folder searching, like essentially, if you use the import keyword, you are importing the full path that you are trying to find, or alternatively, if you are importing a module that is within, that has a bare specifier, that would go into potentially that would go into the modules folder, or it's potential that we wouldn't support that. I think that's up for debate. I'll make a note about that. Then having a create require function to allow for CJS and ESM interop. And I just pointed at Gus's pull request 19360 as something that we can move over to the fork and iterate and reach consensus on how that could be implemented. Similar with the no file extensions, I have my pull request 21729 that we can move to the fork and iterate to make sure that it does what we want it to do. And then have dynamic import to allow for ESM in CJS. Do people have any thoughts, concerns, or opinions about what should be in this minimal kernel? Jan, you have your hand up.
I think it would be important to agree on what we are trying to prove out. So for example, for me, the minimal kernel is, let's have a very stable foundation that 100% everyone can agree on. And then start making decisions based on it. So for example, for me, create require function is technically not necessary because it kind of involves some additional decisions on how people will work with it. Because in theory, you can just import the native module and use import meta URL to get to require stuff, I think.
I think just a clarification, and then I'll call up Salah. The idea of what I thought we were trying to accomplish was, what is a kernel that supports every potential future iteration that we would want to do and does not preclude any of the workflows that we've talked about. So the idea with create require function as being part of that was, a create require function could be an abstraction that import meta require itself would use, but that's a thing that could be shared between both CommonJS and ESM. It's something that people have talked about. I think that a future pull request could remove that. But that if we import does not have the ability to do transparent interop, we need some sort of way of bringing CommonJS into ESM in the minimal kernel. Salah, to you.
Yeah, I think a minimum kernel should really leave standard syntax to work the way it works in other modules that exist right now. So if it's running as a native ESM module, not a native Node module, but it's being handled natively by the engine as a module, then the standard syntax should behave the way the standard syntax behaves in other runtimes that are not experimental, which is really the browsers. It's hard to say, but it is. I think anything that is node specific for the minimal implementation might, in most cases, be non-static at that point. I'm not sure. I'm not saying that everything we do that is node related should be dynamic. But I think we should be very, very careful at what non-standard behavior, even if there's a standard coming down the road, we're trying to adhere to before it actually happens.
Okay, thank you. Jordan?
So when we say minimal kernel, if we're talking about something we could ship unflagged, or are we, or is that?
No, this isn't about something that we would ever ship. This is about, like, if all of us were to come up with a proposal of what are, like, you and I may have very different ideas of what we would want to ship unflagged, what would be a shared kernel between both of them?
So I guess what I'm wondering is, that seems like something we can certainly build, because if we're not planning on ever shipping that, like, that's just clearly defining what we can merge into master now. Like, and I don't have any objections to anything missing, being in there or missing from there. It's more just a question of, I'm not sure what value that is, because to me the challenge isn't writing the code. The challenge is like deciding what we agree on, or like, or rather coming to an agreement on something to ship. Like we can all, it's not even going to be that hard to just say, like, here's all of our opinions. Here's the stuff that nobody argues about. That's our minimal kernel. Like it's tedious, but it's not hard. The hard part is going to be like deciding what ships. So I feel like if the group feels it's valuable to do this minimal kernel, great, let's do it. But like, it just feels to me like it's not, like it's delaying the important work, which is agreeing on what ships.
So the intent, and we could take it either way if we don't think that this is the right thing, would be if we all want to be sending pull requests into this fork, and we want to be able to have like an apples to apples comparison of the two, they should be building off of the same branch. Whereas like, if I do something that removes transparent interop, then adds import meta require, and then does this other thing, there's kind of like 5 hops to get to where I am, versus us starting from the same branch and then maybe having only 2 hops.
I guess that's fair. It makes perfect sense. I agree that will make that easier. It just, I don't think pull requests are necessary or even automatically helpful in helping us agree. I think that the agreement is entirely unrelated to what the code looks like, and the bike shedding and the code review about the implementation is something that is just doesn't need to happen at all until like we agree about this stuff. So I mean, it's fine if we want to do it. It's just to me it seems not productive. That's fair.
I guess I don't feel like we're making movement right now, so I was trying to do something different to see if the shift in the way we work will allow us to be more productive. Jan, you have your hand up. You had your hand up.
Yeah, I was vaguely agreeing with what has been said, but also with your very last comment of maybe just making a change will unblock something. Like, I'm not 100% sure what would get everything flowing, so I can't really disagree with that. But I definitely also feel like if we have a minimal kernel and then 2 people do a pull request, one implementing import.js gets a common JS module, the other implements import.js, gets a ESM module. We invested some time, potentially a non-trivial amount of time, in getting the kernel working and getting those 2 pull requests, and then we are back at where we are right now, which is, so which of the 2 should be merged?
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I think that we need to move on to our next topic. We can bring this back to the issues. I'll take an action item of making that fork, and then perhaps we can just start, having a conversation about, what that minimal kernel can be, and maybe get some pull requests against it. One thing I do think that we should maybe make sure we do is have consensus around issues, and perhaps, disabling the issue tracker on the fork and keeping the issues in one place so we don't have multiple places. So I'll do that in the fork, and then, if people have a problem with that, we can iterate on it. The next one that we have up on here is ESM in JS files. We've run over on different things, so I'm going to drop this to 10 minutes and the transparent conversation to 10 minutes so we have enough time for today's meeting. I wanted to start this one. I don't know how many people have been following 160. The experimental modules one. I think that perhaps 150 got closed since I started this. But Jeff, I wanted to see if you would be willing to kind of give everyone a quick update as to what's going on with the conversation in 150 and 160, what the goal of the conversations are. For myself, it's just that there's been a lot of conversation in there and I haven't had the bandwidth to catch up. So if you can kind of give us an abridged version, that'd be great.
So the short version, and you can go to those issues if you're curious for the details, is that for at least CoffeeScript, but probably for many other build pipelines, they only support .js as an extension. And so there needs to be some way for the output of these build pipelines to be used by Node, where we can kind of configure Node to be like, hey, treat the JS files within this package boundary as ESM, basically as if they're .mjs files. So That 150 was basically reaching agreement that yes, we should find some way to tell Node to do that. And then 160 was, all right, here are some ideas for what the UX of such a configuration would look like. And let's see, can I share my screen? Let me see.
Yeah, if you click on share screen, just a quick clarifying question for you on that. Are you implying that in this model that every single folder that would have a package JSON in it could in theory have different resolution algorithms for what extensions map to specific MIMEs?
I don't know if it would be a whole resolution algorithm, but it would be a mapping, yeah. So there was that other, if you look at this, someone already made a pull request here for just like mode ESM to basically set a JS file within a package boundary to be ESM. So I was kind of, all the other proposals kind of assumed that the logic in here about how to define a package boundary, whether that's a folder or something else, would be, you know, what's in this PR. And then it was like, because this is very limited of just like a Boolean flag. So the idea was, well, we want a little more configurability than that. So what are the ways to do that? You know, like the simplest one, which is the starting point of what became the, I guess, I don't want to use the word consensus, but the merged final proposal is that there becomes a new MIMEs field in package.json, which is just an object that maps extensions to MIME types. And then this follows the browser model, where this is what's happening on a web server. For web servers will, you know, see an MJS extension and map it to text JavaScript, and that's how the browser knows to accept it as an ESM file. So the final proposal takes that as a starting point, like this new MIMEs section with that. And what some people who commented on the thread wanted was a way to define these through external files as well. So it can either be an object, in which case it's a direct mapping one-to-one, or it's an array of strings that are parsed as JSON files. And so it could either be like local or in a package. And the final bit is that if this starts with null as the first element in this array, then that basically like wipes out Node's default mappings first, and then you have to define everything you plan to use. Otherwise, these like build on top of Node's default mapping. So like this example, for example, like I don't specify JSON in here, but like whatever Node's default mapping for JSON is still honored. This is just kind of an override, like overlaid on top of like object.assign Node's default, comma, this object is kind of how they're applied. So that's the gist of it, and that's what's in here. So yeah, I was just kind of hoping we could, I guess, find consensus that this is something we want to move forward on and hopefully get merged into experimental modules, kind of as a sidetrack to whatever we get started with the minimal kernel. You're muted, Miles.
Jordan has his hand up, and then I have a question afterwards.
So I just want to say, like, I've had some discussion on that thread, and I like the concepts. I think it's generic. It can be per package. Like the one concern that I had, which maybe I'm the only one who has this, is that I find that using MIME types is unnecessarily confusing, and that the web has MIME types, but like many Node users will never encounter them or think about them, and whereas file extensions are the things that they will encounter a lot. So my gut preference would be that this would be a mapping of extensions to extensions. It would be like load .js files as if they were .wasm files, or vice versa, or something different. Because to me, that's like, I'm basically, it's to me, it's more of a map of like fake extensions. Like I want to pretend that this extension is this other extension. The mapping to MIMES achieves the same functionality. So I am in complete agreement that that's what we need, that functionality. And we don't have to spend meeting time bike shedding that further, but I wanted to voice that, that I think that it's more ergonomic and approachable to not use MIME types, but that I do love the idea. That's all.
Thank you, Jordan. Jeff, I have two quick questions for you. Where do the list of available MIMEs come from?
You mean like Node's defaults?
Well, you had in there text JavaScript, application Node, application JSON. Is there a list of definitive supported MIME types? Can you do application TypeScript? Like, how does that work?
So I think it basically builds on top of Node's parsing now. Like basically, I don't think this is written out. So I mean, you guys know the Node code base better than I do. So someone correct me, but I'm assuming that like in the Node code base, like it's easy to say .json extension, and it knows, it probably doesn't say so explicitly, but basically treat that as application/JSON, right? And so it knows what to do with a JSON file and how to behave with it. So there's somewhere in the Node code base that like basically is saying how to treat each file extension. So this would basically kind of be making that more explicit. So like instead of that code in the Node code base saying for .json do this, that would be refactored to be like for application/JSON do this. And then somewhere farther up in the code, it would map .json to application/JSON, something along those lines. So just as Node has a set of file extensions that it currently kind of supports out of the box without you registering something to require .extensions, Node would have a set of MIME types that it would support out of the box, and we would have to document those in the docs. And then, yeah, just as you can currently, I mean, I don't know if this is going to be possible with ESM, but just as you can currently in CommonJS add, TypeScript, but say .coffee, you add to require extensions, and then that lets the CoffeeScript thing, transpile it kind of on the fly as Node works. I would presume that there would be some way through loaders or something else to like give Node support for additional MIME types.
Okay. So that kind of led into my second question, which I'll just make a statement and then hand it off to other people. I think that there's an abstraction here that seems a little bit too low for me. And I think we need a more direct connection between the loaders and hooks, like what particularly is running, and the extensions. And while MIME types are kind of like the abstraction that we think about for the browser as to how these things hook up, like to me, the mental model that makes more sense is the extension to the loader hook. So I'd like to see that fleshed out a little bit more about like if there's another step that you can do for declaring new MIMEs and associating those new MIMEs with new loaders. I'd love to see how that would work. Salah, you have your hand up and we have 2 more minutes left. So if you could keep it to a minute, that would be great.
I really love the declarative aspect of it. I think that declarative mappings are far better than the imperative mappings that happen with require, which are very, very hard to understand if you are not fully aware of what happened to your require extensions. So to this, I also want to say that it's nice that Node has packages in package.json, but the concept of a folder is really more universal. We have scopes for service workers, where within a scope, you could actually, which is a folder and anything underneath it, you could have a particular opinion on how network, resolutions or no network resolutions happen. Definitely MIME types are in play there. I'm against MIME types outside of the browser unless necessary. But I really think we should abstract an idea where we say, just like if you open a lot of packages in their dist folder, you're going to find the ESM versus the CJS folder, where one is able to declaratively say that this folder is belonging to a particular mapping strategy. Package.json grows significantly. Chances for conflicts are very, very high with, people who use package.json to bundle things or, anyways, keeping it at 2 minutes plus maybe 2 more. That's it.
Yeah, Jan, you have your hand up? Jan, is that officially putting your hand down? Moving to the next topic?
Oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong button. I'll try to give it quick. So my problem with the proposal is that I see, for me, it's either everyone agrees with the defaults in the ecosystem at large, or we just added 2 lines of fragile boilerplate to every single node package on NPM. Because if someone makes a typo inside of that MIMES thing, their node module breaks, they look for support. If somebody accidentally added the null and suddenly the JSON imports fail, they will be desperate for help. It just feels like something that is opting into a lot of complexity and support in the future just because we don't want to commit to a migration story that is definitive.
Okay, thank you. And I think that perhaps this now leads nicely into the next topic, which is transparent interoperability, which I know is a loaded term. But I think, let's dive right into it. I know that, Jeremiah, you were asking if it was still on the agenda. Do you want to maybe kick off the discussion?
Not really.
So one of the reasons why we're talking about all these things with MIME types, as Benjamin was, actually, Benjamin, do you want to talk about your point right here around interop and JS and why this approach might be being examined right now?
Sure. So just listening to Jeff talk about CoffeeScript and having experience with other compilers like TypeScript, generating JS files from like either TS or Coffee files makes me realize that that step of generating new modules that you then import and then having to rely on Node guessing the file extension to get it right in production just isn't necessary if we lean into the suggestion that was made in the context of the minimal kernel proposals earlier that, as happens in browsers, when you import something with an import declaration, it's just treated as ESM, right? And if that's not going to work because it's not actually ESM, then we're going to need some sort of loader hook API to, transpile files with different file extensions on the fly, something like that. But if we are okay with a world where you can just use an import declaration to import any file path, and maybe we require that it has an extension. We don't try to guess that anymore. And it just gets treated as ESM. And we have a way of making sure that things that aren't really ESM sort of get wrapped as ESM modules. That would work for TypeScript. I think it would work for CoffeeScript as long as those compilers target ESM, that's the generated output. Then, we can just import my module.coffee rather than having to remap these things. If the default is just that import declarations always treat the module as ESM and you have to use import.meta.require to import common.js or maybe import.meta. Something to do with WASM to import exotic module formats, then I don't know. I guess I want to believe that there's a future where we don't have to worry about the mapping between file extensions and MIME types. So that's my goal, and it could be naive, but I really I feel like we're reifying some distinctions here that we may not need to in the long run.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, did someone have a clarifying question specifically for this?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to kind of point out browsers are definitely going to be using MIME type to determine how to parse the thing that you import. It's just that when you import something in browsers, they'll never parse it as a script. It'll either be parsed as a JS module or it'll be parsed as whatever the MIME type indicates, like WASM or something. So that, like, that mapping, I think, or like the mapping of MIME type to parse goal is not something we're going to be able to avoid long term.
But the flip side of that is that the server that you use is likely to use a standardized MIME type database to determine that. So it's not something you're necessarily ever touching. So it is indirectly being determined by the file extension.
Correct.
The file extension tells your server to send them, like, and yes, you can do this, but that's not the normal case. Jan, you have your hand up?
Yeah, basically the same thing that John just said. Like, I think it's a dangerous sentence to say that the server doesn't import everything as MJS. Like, there definitely is a strict whitelist based on indirectly most likely file extension or some explicit per file configuration if it's a CDN. But in the end, most likely the server, for most practical purposes, the browser has a strict whitelist of file extension that it allows to be imported as ES modules.
Jeremiah?
Yeah, I'm not really okay with having the only way to load in with what I consider the correct load order, which would require import statements and not import functions, that would auto wrap all CommonJS in ESM wrappers. If that was safe to do, we would already be doing that.
Can you expand on what you mean by wrappers?
What Benjamin referred to. So making it so when you import CommonJS, you actually import some ESM thing around your CommonJS, which would presumably also go down the tree because it would have to if you are importing actually ESM and not CommonJS.
So this is an exception to what I was saying. There's a difficulty because CommonJS does use the JS file extension right now, and we want to be able to use that for ESM as well. And so that is still an ambiguity that we have to resolve. I was just thinking that like .coffee files, .ts files, even maybe .html files, we could have a loader hook system that like not only wraps those on the fly, but also maybe allows users to configure what MIME types they get. And if that was just a configurable thing, then, well, I guess it's a question of how it should be configured, whether it should be in package.json, as in this proposal, or if it should be like a runtime API. Yeah. So I didn't raise my hand, so I should be quiet now.
Jan?
Yeah, one thing where I'm somewhat cautious about the whole, oh yeah, and if we want to allow the user land to just define an HTML loader, then they just put this into the package.json. The problem with that is that if we allow this, it's definitely also a future compatibility concern, because then suddenly in the ecosystem, there spreads one HTML loader that has very weird semantics. And then suddenly that extension is blocked in the future because we cannot in core ship a maybe even web compatible loader for a certain file extension because some ecosystem thing spread already that is incompatible and is basically blocking what import with that file extension means. Or it becomes really confusing where half of the ecosystem is using one thing and the other half is using the other. So yeah,